Hello? Hey, that's a microphone working. My mic was working earlier on a different app, and this button was on, so I have no idea how that worked. Okay. Uh, Yesterday or earlier in the week, Meg was saying, like, maybe your wizard training is, like, fully kicking in, and that's why technology is just not working for you in any way, shape, or form. And that's certainly possible. Um, I feel like my video is not looking great, but I think that's just the OBS interface. Because I think if I pull it over here, it does look better. Yes. Okay, that's something I need to be aware of. Yeah, so I have two monitors. This is streaming talk shop, shop talk now, which is sort of the same thing. Um, this monitor right in front of me is the big, like, widescreen new one, and the monitor I have over on this side is 10 years old, 12 years old. And I tend to put the OBS interface over there, which I think is as, like, stuff looks better, or I get stuff to look better, having my OBS over on a screen that where what it shows me is not going to look as good as what people are seeing. Hello, Premisaurus. So yeah, welcome everybody. I think I did a craft chat like 2 months ago. What is time? Life is strange. I'm just going to move this up a little bit so that I'm more centered here. And we'll do this. Okay, cool. So yeah, I announced that there was going to be a craft chat on, like, Monday, and then I asked for some questions, and I don't think I got any questions. But since there's people who are here, if y'all have topics that you've been chewing on or thinking about, or trying to figure out, I would love to hear, and then we can try to talk some things through. I have a couple of topics that I just brainstormed in, like, 2 minutes before going live, but those are very much topics where it's like I also have questions, as opposed to here is a thing on which I can speak with great authority. And hello, also Carenthology. So yeah, we've got a nice writer gathering already. It is lovely to see all of you in the chat here. Because a lot of the writing that I've done lately has been working on RPG stuff, but I did recently go back to my novel document for the mecha novel that I'm working on, which the current code name is Stolen Futures, because I came up with a like trilogy idea. Let's see, so that's with, like, a trilogy naming structure of, like, Stolen Futures, Imagined Pasts, and then book 3 is The Broken Now, or something, where the title for the book 3 breaks the format, but in a way that still then sticks to the format. Heists and how to. Yes, actually, heists I feel like I can talk about. Advice number 1 for heists is to just watch a lot of episodes of Leverage. But for lack of that, I think the thing with heist, I have found, I think, that a lot of the time when I'm running TTRPGs, I think about those situations in some of the same terms that I think about heists. But I am also not a, like, super lots of detail. Here are the 7 very specific, like, historical locks that are on the various buildings. Like, this is this type of safe and this is this type of safe. I don't tend to prep in that fashion. In terms of heist things, I think the advice that I've taken from either reading stuff by John Rogers or watching Leverage or, like, seeing other people talking about heist stuff, there's, like, a major question is, where do things go wrong? Are there challenges in making the plan and then there's tension and maybe tri-file cycles and uncertainty in the making of the plan. So maybe if you have a story where you have to gather your crew and then you go and do the heist, then maybe you have the uncertainty in the gathering the crew part, or there's like rising action where there's tension and pushback. This is related to the idea that if you are showing the characters planning and you can see them problem solving as they are planning, you may not need things to go as wrong once the plan has started, because you've already seen, the audience has already seen conflict and adaptation and response and overcoming challenges in the planning section. If instead you have the characters planning more off screen and then you jump to the start of the heist, it may be more useful narratively to have things go wrong in the heist once you've jumped to it. So in something where you have like a movie where you have that like everybody around the table scene, and they talk through, well, what if they this, and then we're gonna do this, and then hey, can you do this other thing, and like we have almost the narrative structure of them building the heist as if they are building a story, and that can be interesting and have its own tension and uncertainty. Then as they are executing the heist, you may not need that stuff to go as wrong, but then having things go wrong can be an escalation on top of what the work you've already done in showing that the characters are smart and capable and have connections and have thought about things. A caper versus a heist, by my understanding, is that a caper is more likely to start, or more of the action happens after the characters have gotten the MacGuffin. So you get the thing and then you try to get away with it, is more like a caper. Heist is maybe the other way around, where the vast majority of the time you're spending building the crew, doing legwork, making the plan, and then executing the plan is like the climax of the story. So those are my that's like 5 minutes of initial prepared thoughts, or more off the top of my head thoughts about heists. Was that useful? And is there any like subtopic of that I can elaborate on in a way that will be useful? I think in terms of structure, if you find that you are, if you're more of like an outline or structure type of writer, it may be useful to do what crime writers do. Magical heists. Oh, okay, interesting. If you know what the thing is, like what the bag or what the goal or what the loot is, and you work backward from the last step is magic will make heists harder. Okay, yeah, I can talk to that. In order to get the loot, they have to overcome the last obstacle. Okay, what's the last obstacle? Okay, in order to overcome that obstacle, they will have to X, and then basically you reverse engineer it, so that you know the steps along the way. I think in terms of magic making heists harder rather than easier, a first thought that comes to me is magic being used as part of a defensive mechanism, whether that is like a magical version of a biometric scan where only someone of the right bloodline, because in fantasy there's a lot of bloodline obsession and it's weird, you might have that kind of a thing. You might have like a specific artifact or like a magically aligned key where it's like, oh, there's like sympathetic resonance or whatever between a key or something that serves as a key and a lock. And so your criminals will have to figure out how to either get around the magical protections, which in this case serve as an analog to technological protections, like a safe lock or a biometric scan or something. Other ways that magic could make heists harder is some way in which the magic interacts with the loot itself. Like if you have a world where magic is like ambient in the world, and then you have a loot item that if it's exposed to like the general ambient magical flows, then something happens that maybe your criminals don't want to, and so they need some kind of either physical or metaphysical intervention. They need like a lead box kind of a situation to be able to transport the volatile loot. Is something that could be interesting. When I ran Court of Blades as a home game, and this was, I guess, last year coming into this year, the first job that the characters did was to break into one of the other like major houses and forge or replace a invitation to a major party, because the group had not been invited to an important party, and it would have been a major social blow for the house they work for it to be known that this individual group was disinvited from a party. And so their job was get yourself re-invited, and they decided to break into the like administration building of this house and replace the invite list with one that they had forged where they were back on the invite list. So in order to do that, they needed to get into the building, and then they needed to get through the building to the place with the list. And so one of the obstacles that I put in front of them was magical equivalents to like motion cameras, where like, oh, okay, there's like a gemstone with silver wrapped around it, just so, being hung from a bit that goes over a door frame, almost like it's, you know, a downward facing camera, or like it's a chime that like rings when you open the door, because it's pointed right over the door, and so it sees when the door is being opened. And I presented that as a magical obstacle, and then the characters kind of flowing with the Forged in the Dark style improv, take a sketched out setting and then make it your own, and how you do things. Say, okay, well, I would have brought arcane implements with me, and so I have one thing that's like a mirror, and then we have like a special powder and something else. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the powder on the mirror, and then we're going to hold up the mirror to this kind of detecting thing as we open the door, and I'm going to do it in such a way so that this magical detection device believes that it's seeing just the normal thing. So, you know, like you're doing kind of smoke and mirrors kind of stuff. I don't remember exactly the details. The player had a really good idea. It's just been, I don't know, nine or more months since that happened. I don't remember as many of the details. So there's like magic in a really practical, small scale, instrumentalized fashion in doing magic, where it's like, oh, okay, so we're going to replace kind of technological or mundane defensive mechanisms with magical ones, like the blood magic versus biometrics. We have the kind of magic as weather or environmental condition, like you can't take the item out of this place because, you know, if it's exposed to ether or whatever, then bad stuff happens. And then depending on, you know, if your magic system is more numinous and more obscure, it's like, it's not magic as if it as a separate set of physics, in the way that we have, you know, in some fantasy there's magic, it's just it operates more like physics than like something numinous or supernatural or inconsistent. It works consistently. If instead you're going to that like more numinous place, your blood is now my blood is also really interesting for a thing like, would you need to steal somebody's blood, and then how do you make it so that your blood is like their blood, or do you do something else to fool them, or do you do some kind of magic so that when you prick your finger somebody else's blood is drawn on the needle or something? Because magic is cool and versatile, you can do all sorts of different things. So that's very cool. See, this makes me want to write a magic heist, which is handy because I can just put some kind of magic heist into the Court of Blades game that I'm running for Speculate, and then it's other people's job to figure out how to how to fix a thing. All I have to do is present the challenge, and then think about, here's some possibilities on how somebody might overcome it, and then I can give that as a hint or a tip, and then hope or expect, more likely, that the players will come up with something completely different that I had not thought about in any way, shape, or form, and then that will be very cool, and it'll work or create complications depending on what the dice say. Something that I've been thinking about, that's sort of related, is how to change Dungeons & Dragons 5e enough that I'll be more excited to run it and it won't be as frustrating to me without it, or while letting it still feel enough like Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition that if I were running it as an actual play series, people would go, yeah, that's a D&D game. Yeah, it's a D&D game, and Mike is using some special rules for like factions and things because Blades in the Dark is great at that. I don't know that just putting the faction layer on top of Blades in the Dark or on top of 5th edition D&D will be enough for me, because I don't like how magic works in D&D 5th edition. If I read any Jack Vance, Dying Earth, where that kind of magic system comes from, it was a long time ago, and I've not read very much, and I don't really have any affection for it. And here we are, 40-ish years later, and the D&D magic system still mostly always works like that. There have been additions, sometimes there are additions where it's like, you're going to have, instead of spell slots, you have magic points, and it costs different numbers of points to use different levels of spells. So the first part of the, heisting a bunch of my, oh, okay. Yeah, hopefully no one will take your actual blood preemie. That would be very bad. Yeah, layered heist, because sometimes you need to get a specific thing in order to do your heist, right? And so one of the places where you can put tension and uncertainty and escalation is in that setup phase, where like, oh, do you have to break somebody out of prison because they're the only person who has the only person who has like the alchemical skill to fake somebody's blood. And so you do a heist to be a prison, like a prison break, in order to get this person out, so that then they can do this thing that you and your crew know that you can't do on your own. Or do you need to steal a specific thing? Do you need to make a dirty deal to get access to some kind of technology? Do you need to do a favor for like a local gang or the local mob so that then they do something to interfere with the police while you're doing your heist, because from your recon or whatever that the thing that's going to keep you from being able to succeed is the way that the police operate. And so you need to change the board state if we're thinking about heist as like a board game or like a, like chess or something like that. I was going to go to Go or Weiqi, but like the tricky thing there is that the board state situation works different there. You're mostly adding things, and then sometimes you take the tokens off, but only in very specific circumstances. So that's me identifying that this tangent thought that I had is not necessarily the best framework or image for the thing that I'm talking about. So yeah, you've got, in Blades in the Dark terms, this would be like a linked plan where you do a heist so that you can then go do another heist. Reverse. I'm also, I recently saw an ad for the game Corridor, but with like Q, like Corridor, which I sold when I worked at a game store in high school and college. We had this game, which I liked. It's Quoridor, Corridor, from 1997. I liked it. And the thing with that one is, on your turn, you either move a pawn one square, or you can put down a little wall. And so it's almost a little bit like a tower defense game. as your opponent is moving their pawn, you put the walls down to impede their progress so that your pawn can get across the board faster, or you can get across the board first. It's very cool. Or at least my memories of it are cool. So that's that. Yeah, so for like 5e heisting and D&D, so the idea that I had was Planescape is coming back to D&D 5th edition, or is coming back to D&D with a 5th edition release next year, according to Wizards. I really like Planescape. I love the city of Sigil. I love a big fantasy crime city. Sigil is a place that has a bunch of different factions. I love Tony DiTerlizzi's art, which is all over kind of the original Planescape sets. In fact, I'm going to get up real quick and get the box set that I have. Okay, so what I have here, I'm going to see if I can get it on camera. This is the Planescape campaign setting box from, you guys tell me what year you're from? Looks like 1994. So I was 11. I was not, I think the time when I was into Planescape was after Planescape stuff had already started coming out. Is there actually a Sigil map in here? I think there is. So that's not Sigil. This is Sigil? Okay. This is very big. So look at this ridiculousness. Here, actually, I'm going to pull this back. Got this huge thing, and then there's this big map. Right. You got this thing. So just cool, gorgeous, weird art. And like, what's up with these? Here's all the different planes and shit. And then like cosmographical terms and some cool alien person. Yeah, Hades. And so what else is in here? So we've got the map of Sigil, we've got a player's guide to the planes, Sigil and Beyond, which is a big chunky setting book, a monster supplement, a GM screen just for Planescape, very pretty, with D&D 2nd edition stuff that I absolutely will not need to use mechanically. And so this I bought like 6 years ago because I remember looking at Planescape stuff when I was much younger and thinking, that's very cool, and then I didn't buy it. I did buy and play Dark Sun stuff when I was younger because I have long enjoyed post-apocalyptic media in the like kick at the darkness till it bleeds daylight kind of fashion. But Dark Sun has not yet been announced for 5th edition, and I have other Dark Sun stuff. But what I was thinking is, if Planescape is coming back next year, and I were to run a... fixing Dark Sun, there's some big stuff to figure out what to do with Dark Sun. Like, Mull are a problem because yikes. So that I think it's an interesting challenge, but more interesting to me is, can I take what I love about Planescape with weirdness and I have no idea. The kids are asleep. I imagine that that's what they were going for, but in my brain I always just pronounced it the other way. So I think I get, like, it's not too hard to know what they were going for, but I don't know that I'm necessarily a fan of that because, like, it just ties into all of the weird uh, race versus species stuff. Planescape, yeah. So Planescape is, for me, the most weird fantasy of the major D&D settings. I don't know where I'm cut off major versus minor. Like, there's a couple of D&D settings that I just don't know really well. But by my understanding, something like Birthright is way more like Game of Thrones, whereas something like Planescape, you're getting into some of the non-Tolkienist fantasy influences, which is fun for me because while I grew up, listening to and reading Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, I'm very game to have my fantasy extend beyond the kind of lineage of Tolkien where I can, because that's where my interest lies. Not because I think it's you're bad or wrong if you don't step outside that lineage, but it's because my interest takes me outside that lineage. So, like, I don't want to fight with Tolkien people today. And, Planescape has a really cool, very rich visual history because of the art of Tony DiTerlizzi, as well as a lot of other people who worked on Planescape stuff. And having all of that as inspiration is really cool. I like the idea of, like, a gigantic city that's kind of this big nexus, and so I can Babylon 5 style have, like, different peoples from various planes and dimensions and things popping in and out. Sigil as a city has a bunch of factions, and so I could probably take Planescape material from this box set and from a few more PDFs that I'm likely to buy if I go ahead with this approach, and just use the Blades in the Dark rules and be like, okay, this faction is this size, and this faction is this size, and this faction is this size. And then if I were running a campaign in Sigil, they wouldn't have to leave Sigil for very long, and we'd still have all of the cool stuff of faction interplay, and I could take them from low level to higher level, or maybe I would just start them at, like, level 3 or level 5, so they have more of their kit in place, and they can be a little bit more, farther up toward movers and shakers within a faction ecosystem, and just do all of that, where I smush together things that are interesting to me about a fantasy setting here, Planescape, and the things that are interesting to me about Blades in the Dark. Like, I think you can absolutely do this with Waterdeep. For me, Sigil is Waterdeep if more of the dials go to 11 or are non-Euclidean to begin with, right? What counts as a weird faction in Waterdeep and what counts as a weird faction in Sigil are very different. And my interest in fantasy, or at least in this kind of, like, adventure fantasy, is likely to lead me to that weirder place in terms of wanting to be able to show off what I can do with world building, just having cool, weird stuff to draw on. Like, here, okay, so behind me is, all these books that I wrote, and those of you that have read Shield and Crocus know maybe have an idea of why I like weird fantasy stuff. These gnomes are weird versus mouth covered people are weird. Exactly. And I can take something like Sigil and look at, okay, here's some stuff that's written out, and then I can fill in a bunch of space on my own. I feel much more confident doing that than trying to do the same in a place like Waterdeep. And a lot of this may just be a mentality or mindscape, like a perspective approach thing. This is not me telling you that this is what you need to do. It's just what I'm thinking about and what I'm inclined to do with my stuff. So that's some stuff I've been thinking about. Mechanically, I think that there are still some big hurdles that I would need to get over, a lot of which involve like enemy and encounter design and how spellcasting classes work, because I think that I can do a fair bit of bringing my DMing experience playing Powered by the Apocalypse and Forged in the Dark games to D&D and try to play around some of the things that I don't like in D&D, namely this a thing that I see often in comedy D&D shows when they're actual play is the fact that the first level characters are largely incompetent, especially when you treat a failure on a not too difficult roll as being, or when you treat a roll where you didn't hit the DC as you, the character, failed or are bad at a thing somehow, versus a circumstance got in your way. One of the pieces of jamming advice in Blades in the Dark is that because these characters that you are running for are assumed to be competent, experienced scoundrels and criminals, when they fail something, it may be more interesting and more appropriate to the fiction to talk about what unforeseen complication or extra factor the characters were not prepared for or hadn't thought of, and that thing creates the failure, as opposed to, well, you, Jim, the master thief, who have built your character around being a thief and getting into places that people shouldn't be allowed to get into, because you rolled 1, 1, 2, 3, 1 on your huge dice pool to break the lock, you just failed to do the thing. You sucked at it. You couldn't figure it out. If instead you go, well, so you've got all this experience and you see it and you take a look at it and you know what it takes to do it. Here's the problem. There are, 5 guards walking around the corner and you do not have time to get through this lock. If your buddies can keep those guards at bay, you can get through this. It's just going to take you time. But you can't do it in the time that you have. The guards are going to get to you before you can get through this lock. It still values and acknowledges the skill of the character, but it introduces this complication. In this case, what I'm imagining is that there were not guards there before this character rolled a failure, and therefore there's a complication. Yeah, the person who set this is left-handed and you sprung the trap because you're not. I think this can be good writing advice more generally, depending on what you're trying to communicate about your characters. If you are writing like a heist where you're assuming that all of your characters are really competent at the thing that they specialize in, you may have a better time thinking about complications or twists that are in this style of unforeseen complexities or extra hazards, and leaning toward those instead of the try-fail being you're not able to do the thing yet. You can't quite do the thing. If instead you have a character who is on like a growth arc or a learning arc, one way you might be able to communicate that progression is that earlier on in that character's arc, you frame failures as you don't have the skill or you don't have the experience to do a thing. And then in the middle, you start to have the character understanding that there are like, oh, okay, there's going to be external factors that are going to keep you from succeeding in this situation. Or they have the skill for a thing, but then there's an unforeseen complication. Or maybe they realize that their skill is incomplete because they understand 80% of the thing, but they don't know this one element, or they haven't done, they haven't been a safe cracker long enough to be familiar with this rare type of safe. And so they have to apply what they know from other safes to try to figure out how to do this. And you can represent escalation by showing that this character, even as they're growing in skill, still has a way to go. And then later on in their journey, if you want to show mastery, you can have them overcoming challenges that previously had vexed them, or you can present them with a good and like powerful challenge by putting something in where they have all the skill that they need to do the thing, but then they're under a time pressure, or like, oh, okay, well, you can break this lock, but the room you're in is filling with gas, so you know you're good enough to do it. Are you good enough to do it in 90 seconds? Yeah, time pressure. And another thing you can do is hit them along an emotional axis. Like, if you are an experienced safecracker, are you still as good if you just got dumped? Yeah, the grift takes a week. You have 2 days. Exactly. Or like, maybe you could do this grift in 2 days, but you just got dumped, or a family member is sick, or you just had a huge argument with a friend. And so you add tension through linking one complication to another. So if you've got like a character, if you have like a friendship subplot, and then you have this character learning to become a master safecracker, you can make the safecracking stuff harder by having there be a downturn in the friendship arc, and so that then this subplot impacts the main plot, right? Conversely, or inversely, I don't remember, you can have a thing where something in the subplot gives them the confidence or the experience or the assistance, like maybe literally an extra set of hands, to overcome something that they wouldn't have been able to overcome on their own previously. In a lot of professional and weirdo detective stories, so something like Castle or Psych or Fringe or any of those kinds of things, or like Lie to Me, when you have the special character with a special skill set who is partnered with person who is a cop or a person who is a detective, what I find is that there is often a scene for the specialist character outside of the investigation that gives them some bit of inspiration or new information that then allows them to reapproach the investigation and solve it because they've gained some new perspective. You can absolutely use that structure in other storytelling, where when I did Clarion West, one structure that Nancy Kress, who was the week 1 instructor, suggested is having 2 problems fix one another. The first thing that comes to mind with this is a bit from Poor Unfortunate Souls in Little Mermaid, the song from the Little Mermaid animated film by Disney. This one wants to be thinner, this one wants to get the girl, or something like that. And so like person one wants A, person B wants this other thing, and then they can be that thing for one another. It's like the opposite of the Gift of the Magi, where the one sells their hair and then to get a brush, and then the other one, the one sells their hair to get a blah, and then the other person sells the thing that A was for to get a brush, but then the other person doesn't have their hair. You can do the opposite of that. The opposite of the 2 problems solve one another is also something I think shows up in romance fairly often, where each character has like a major life thing that they are struggling with, and then coming to be with this other person, and that relationship becoming strong and like maturing puts them in a position to be able to then solve their own personal thing, where maybe you have character A is has a bad relationship with a family member that they can't stand up for themselves. They cannot create the situation where they can stand up for themselves and kind of say what they need to say to get the parent or some other family member to change their behavior. And then the person that they're with is like really assertive and is good at like identifying and communicating about problems. And then that person B does that thing in the relationship with person A. And so person A gets immediate experience being in a conversation where someone brings up a tough topic and communicates their needs so that then the relationship can become healthier. And so then person A either takes that skill that they've learned or developed, or they feel supported, their morale is in such a place, they've gotten other things in their life together so that then they can bring themselves to do this really hard thing with their family member. So this is something I see in romance fairly often. I think it's a good structure. And it's another way of solving one part of a character's problem or one thread of your overall plot. Not with, romance structures so well. Yeah, like the best romance writers for me are among the best people overall in writing that I have seen when it comes to character writing specifically, and then how character relationships and character arcs interact with other elements of plot or of your story. If you're plot versus story, different conversation. It's all good. So I recommend reading romance to people who are writing outside of the romance genre if you want some very cool examples of how people write character relationships. I mostly read contemporary romance because I've had a hard time finding historicals that work as well for me. I've read, I'd say, a fair bit of Regency romance at this point. It's not as much my thing. So I like contemporary. I've also really enjoyed some like kind of futuristic science fiction romance, some post-apocalyptic romance. Let's see, Wanted. I'm going to find a book that I really like, and I'm just going to grab the recommendation. So yeah. So that is that right? Yeah, Wanted and Wired. And okay, I'm just getting the name right. So that's Wanted and Wired by Vivian Jackson. This is the first in a 2 or 3 book series. Let's check. Nope, that's not where I wanted to be. Yes. I know there's a book 2. I don't remember if there's a book 3. Looks like there is a book 3. Great. I've only read the first one. So this is a like cyberpunk science fiction romance in a, I would say, like a partial collapse. Like the USA broke apart and there was some big stuff. And so now we have like cyberpunk corporate state wars and things like this. And what we have in Wanted and Wired is so what is it? The main character 1 is named Mari, who is like cybernetically enhanced kind of super soldier type who carries a bunch of guilt and believes that like kind of her drama is about that. And then her handler is a more thoroughly augmented person who kind of is talked about as being post-human and thinks that no one could love him because he's not a person anymore, like that he doesn't have humanity anymore. And so those characters, they are a good matched pair in terms of the ways that their damage or their wound, if we're talking kind of in more common romance structure terms, their wounds and their personality inclinations and like the parts of them that are like helpful and beneficial to one another. Yes. Oh, scars and splinters. Interesting. So those two characters are a good example in my memory of characters that at first they exacerbate one another's like anxieties about themselves, but then as the characters get to know each other and they kind of get past their preconceived notions about who the other person is and how that person thinks about them, they reach this point of affirmation and support, mutual support, which is really cool. And there's like, fight scenes and heists and stuff like that. I really enjoy science fiction romance when where the battle couple, right? And this is specifically, they are sometimes battle couple and sometimes they are ass kicker and guy in the chair. But then there's times when they're both in battle and they do the battle couple stuff. When a science fiction romance or a fantasy romance in this case, or in addition, when one of those can deliver world building and characterization that feels like this is a good science fiction book or this is a good fantasy book in terms of making use of the tools of that genre, and it does a good job of being a emotionally satisfying romance, huge thumbs up. If those elements are truly intertwined and they are supporting one another, all the better. Like Wanted and Wired is probably one of my favorite examples of a book where the world building and like the premise and the science fictioniness feeds so well into the characters and their character relationships so that the story that we're getting feels distinct. I have a few different Ilona Andrews books, but I have not actually ever really gotten into them. I know they're, very broadly beloved in that kind of intersection fantasy romance space. So I will get to some Ilona Andrews at some point. I should probably just go and see what I haven't, like, do I have any in paperback, and if not, get a recommendation of a place to start with ebook and just make it go. Yeah, no worries. It's a good recommendation if I had not heard of them before, and a good recommendation to anybody who is watching. So let's see. I'm thinking about other like fantasy or science fiction romances that I really liked. There's a post-apocalyptic romance series where I like the third one more than the first two, which is not as useful. But anyway, so yeah, that's some stuff about kind of using different parts of your story to bear up other parts of your story. Something that I had down in my notes was balancing POV and introducing new characters and then writing around things that your character doesn't know. Because in the mech novel that I'm working on now, because I'm waiting to get notes on the previous novel, I have what could easily become a gigantic, way too large cast. Because I could have up to 4 POV characters from one country, and then, more like 5 or so from one, and then 1 to 2 from each of 2 other countries / factions that are all antagonistic toward one another. And when I get more than about 3 or 4, when I get to about 3 or 4 main POVs, and then I start wanting to add more, my alarm bells start going off. Because I think it becomes harder to have each of those characters to be able to deliver a satisfying emotional arc for each of those characters, and it becomes tricky for the reader to keep track of all of those things, especially if their stories are a little bit less interconnected. So what I've done so far, and I'm 25,000 words into this, which is probably a quarter of the way in, maybe a little bit more than a quarter of the way in, because my first drafts are often short. I kind of write with some scenes being fairly spare, and then I get to the end, I let it sit, I go back, I do revision at the beginning of the book because I've gotten to know the characters way better, and so I can write the characters better at the beginning because I'm 110,000 words into writing those characters instead of 0 to 10,000 words into writing those characters. I talk about this as being related to my experience being a TTRPG player, where I tend to get to know characters by playing them. When I was much younger, I would write longer character backstories, but in the past or basically since I got really back into TTRPGs, between like 2015, 2016, and now, I don't do a lot of character backstory work. I will like figure out who the person is in session 0, or I will have a sense of them and then write or gestate the equivalent of maybe 2 or 3 paragraphs in my head, and then I will get to the table and start figuring out the rest of who this person is, because I find it easier to react in the moment to establish characterization, and that is interesting to me in a way that just writing a full 5-page bio or taking like a big psychometric test for my character, those are not as interesting to me at this point, in a way like they used to be. A lot of the writing I used to do was character background writing. I would write like, a 4 or 5 page short story that was me figuring out who that person was, and then I would come to the table and I would play them. So Ring Dalmore, my Blaze in the Dark character for the Case of the Cindered Seal, sometimes just wheel spinning, and I'll get back to Ring in just a moment. Creatively, when I'm doing prep and like world building and some outlining and thinking about who the characters are, I will reach this point where I kind of have a critical mass of idea and interest, and it just kind of collapses forward to create a wave that gets me started writing. And I've learned to not struggle against that process, where I will build stuff up and then I just get this feeling where like I want to get started writing, and I just let that happen, rather than going, no, I have to prepare more, and just building up farther and farther. Because I think what would happen if I resisted that like get started urge is that I would end up with stuff that I couldn't then bring into play writing in the moment, because that happens with other things. Like in this mech novel that I'm writing, I have like background stuff that I wrote in my notes, and I don't know that it's actually going to come into the book. It may just prove to be chaff. Could I write faster if I did more of that prep ahead of time and learned how to like differentiate between the types of prep and background work that do and don't, that are and are not going to show up and be as useful? Yeah, probably. But I haven't figured out how to do that yet. And my process mostly works when I'm not in a global pandemic that makes it much harder for me to see people as often in the way that I want to. Yeah, I think I've heard from, I guess it was Becca Syme at Better Faster Academy, but apologies to Becca if this was not her, that maybe most people are not 100% plotters or 100% pantsers, and if like 60 to 80% of writers are somewhere in the middle, then you're going to want to be able to have some of that flexibility, where there are going to be times when you either need to slow down and think more to make a plan, or there are times when the way out is through, and just like showing up and writing and either kind of barreling through a scene or skipping ahead or coming up with something in the moment is going to be the productive approach in order to get done what you want to get done. So back to Ring. So when Brandon pitched Case of the Cindered Seal and asked me to be a player in the group, I had run Blades in the Dark before, I think once for Speculate, and I had listened to / watched a fair amount of actual play, and so I had a decent sense of the setting, and I had seen the Spider playbook, the kind of mastermind playbook, and said, I want to do that. That seems really cool. That fits my playstyle really well. And so I had the mechanics for the character, And when I came to the table for the very first session, I knew that Ring was a Akarosi veteran of the Unification War. So from Akaros, from Duskwall, had been conscripted and sent to fight, and was a sergeant, because it was important for their story that they were someone who had like led people and those people had died, and that was why they're haunted. So I knew heritage, I knew background, Akaros, military, war veteran, was a squad leader, and I knew the kind of like, these are the things that they're good at in terms of action dots. I did not have their relationship with Dern as like co-parents of all of these porters as like as a found family. I had Ring's obligation is to these workers that they kind of oversee / support, but my initial idea was more like a shift leader or like a union rep, where people would show up and Ring would like talk through whatever their challenges were or give them their assignments for the day, and then like go and be checking in on people. My obligation would be like doing paperwork or something. And so that's obviously not where they ended up, because I had a certain idea and then Brandon pitched me on things and I liked that pitch, and so I leaned into it, and we ended up with the character going in a very different place. And all this stuff about like Ring kind of being this parent, the kind of what if a good gang leader parent, kind of what if Fagin but good, came in through play later on rather than anything else. And that approach has worked pretty well for me in games where I have the latitude to like establish stuff as true in play without having to have like presented it as backstory ahead of time. Because I've not been in games where I try to introduce something and the GM is like, hey, well, you didn't introduce that beforehand. Like, so no, your character cannot have XYZ thing in their background. Because I think a lot of GMs that I play with are not super excited. Like they're not interested in, okay, here's a new game, so I'm going to read 30 to 60 pages of fiction / character write-ups. We play to find out what happens. So we have that. And the groups that I've been in have generally been productive in terms of collaboration, to the point where we are able to bounce off of one another's ideas in the moment versus needing to bring a lot of predetermined stuff to play. One thing I will say is that the campaign setup rules in Magpie Games' Avatar Legends RPG, so this is the official RPG for Avatar: The Last Airbender and Avatar: The Legend of Korra. So Magpie is the company that made Masks: A New Generation, which was created by Brendan Conway. Brendan Conway is one of the, I think, co-owners of Magpie, and he was a major player in the Avatar Legends design. This Avatar Legends game feels to me like state-of-the-art TTRPG design in a lot of ways. It's kind of iterating on and building out a Powered by the Apocalypse framework in new and interesting ways, especially in the combat system that I've now gotten to play with. But another thing that's really powerful is the tools that are provided in the book for your session 0 stuff. So the book will tell you, hey, don't spend too much time thinking about like what playbook you want to play or what you want your character to be, because you're going to talk that through in person. Whether that is in person in a session 0 online or in the same room or whatever. And so it gives you, it has a full walkthrough of figure out what you want your like tone to be, figure out what you want your scope to be. Are you going to stay in one city? Are you going to do like a grand world tour? What era are you going to play in? What era of the Avatar kind of continuity? And so a lot of these things that have been custom and like oral tradition in terms of here are things to figure out in session 0 for your TTRPG. They're just explicitly written in the book as steps to take so that everybody's on the same page and that the characters emerge from and are deeply connected to the premise of the series or the campaign that you're playing, that the characters are well suited for the scope that you're designed to play in. So this is like the if you play a pirate in a land-bound game problem, where you're really excited to play a pirate and then the game is never going to go to sea. That's a problem. If you use session 0 tools like this, you're going to know, yes, we are going to be going to sea. We're traveling between the different nations. My sailor pirate character is going to get to do the things that I want them to be able to do. In something like D&D, if you're playing Ghosts of Saltmarsh, you should still have that conversation about how much are we going to focus on the ship stuff versus other aspects that are in that adventure path. So I highly recommend checking out Avatar Legends. The physical books, I believe, are shipping here in the next few months. I don't know how long it's going to be before the book is just like generally available in hobby shops / from, if you're just ordering direct from the Magpie site. I back the Kickstarter, so I'm getting it through that. But definitely something to check out. I guess we're 2 sessions in, so we did session 0 and then 2 play sessions in, and it's been very cool. And I'm super excited, or I'm very glad that I'm playing this game, because from the perspective of someone who is designing a game right now, it feels really good to be playing something that it was designed recently and is where the designers were clearly thinking about some of the things that I've been thinking about and think are important in terms of setting the whole game up to succeed by having certain conversations in that session 0. Because I think for me, there's 2 big parts to session 0. There's safety and content calibration of like, I don't want this in my game, or I don't want to have to deal with X, or are we going to have racism in our fantasy world or not? Like that kind of stuff, if you're, so that you can set some fundamental things up that everybody is going to be able to have a good time. And that feeds into and overlaps broadly with, but is sometimes distinct from scope, tone, like how do these characters know each other? How long do you think we were going to play? Some other things where I've done that latter type of work in session 0. I had been doing that with my groups, notably before I learned about safety tools, kind of especially stuff beyond lines and veils in the X card. I think it's good to do those interconnected because they feed into one another. Having now done a session 0 live for Valorword, I think that if I were redoing that session 0 like this week, I would take the content, like lines and veils, green, yellow, red, like what do we mean when we say yellow for insert name content? I would take that conversation offline, because I think it's good for people to be able to be more vulnerable and not feel like they're accountable to anybody who isn't a collaborator in play, and so that people can just say things they don't want to deal with without having to explain it to people that they don't know. I understand why I wanted to do all of it live, but in practice, we spent about 90 minutes or so on the content stuff that I think was good, useful work, but it may not have been as entertaining to other people, except as like in an educational fashion of here is what it is like to have this conversation, for people to kind of sort through their feelings and get 4 or 5 people all on the same page about where a story is and isn't going to go. So that's some extra meandering over various story things. What else was I doing? Writing around characters. Yeah, so talking about balancing POVs. I have written books with more than 4 POVs. I'm pretty sure, let's see. So I had Shield and Crocus was First Sentinel, Aegis, Sapphire, Blurred Fit. Yeah, I think I had one or more, probably more like 2 or 3 POV chapters each for about 5 or 6 characters. Some of those characters got way more POV chapters, and then I also had interludes with other characters. In Stolen Futures, the mech novel I'm writing right now, I have 3 POV characters that show up in the first 5 or 6 chapters, and then I add one more between chapters like 5 and 15, and then I think add one more after chapter 15. My hope is that is going to be like there were going to be maybe 4, max 5 main POVs, and then I will have interludes, or there will be some characters for whom there are like 1, 2, or 3 POV chapters. Meg, my spouse, is a super big Stephen King fan, and so she's gotten me into Stephen King. And one of the things that really marveled me in reading books like Salem's Lot and The Stand was the fact that King, partially maybe drawing on like journalist background or whatever, his ability to draw up character portrait in like 1 page, and for me as the reader to feel like that person is a real person, is just staggering. And something that was actually a challenge for me in Salem's Lot and The Stand was that his character portraits were so good, I didn't know who he meant to be the main characters, because people were drawn with a lot of skill and attention and like compassion. Meg, who had read a lot more books, a lot more of Stephen King, or maybe read things in a different order than I ended up reading, did not find that she had that problem, because she knew King's like writerly tics enough to know, okay, this is a Stephen King main character type of person, and then this is a Stephen King main character kind of person. So flipping that around, when I'm writing, I want to communicate to a reader, this is somebody who you're going to spend a lot of time with, you're going to want to emotionally invest in, you're going to want to remember, maybe more of their world and how they operate than somebody who's just a one-off. And so with that, I'm using the tool of labeling some chapters interlude, and that way I can do one chapter with a POV character who's in all the cases has been in the book before, but the reader has not had a section in their point of view from their perspective. And so I can introduce a character, see them as a supporting character through other POV characters, and then reach the point where, okay, now it's time to get in their head and see the world from their perspective. And that has worked pretty well so far. But again, I'm only 25,000 words in or so, and I thought I was going to be a lot farther along. Turns out that re-releasing a bunch of books and designing and then setting up playtests for a TTRPG is really difficult in a global pandemic, and especially so when you have not really done that process before for a TTRPG, because you're just getting into design. Turns out it may take longer than you expect to do things when you haven't done them before, or when you're applying skills from a different discipline to a new thing. Say lovey. That's how it is. So it's all fine. I'm gonna, I'll write the book at the speed that I can. I'm not under deadline for anything right now, except like I have told KDP that I will give them the ebook file for the new edition of Hexamancy by X time in today. Sorry, I just saw a notification on a thing that I'll have to get to later. So does anybody have other like writing or different stuff, topic stuff that they've been chewing on that you would like to chat about here? We're about an hour 15 in. I could go for a bit longer, but I could also kind of be done. I've got some shopping that I need to go do before a non-broadcast game tonight. I'm going to say, as a reminder, that this stream is brought to you by my Patreon, because I used to do essays for that, and I found that it's a lot easier to talk about stuff live, hence these streams. And so that's what people get for the Patreon. I have other stuff that's exclusive, but these are, as I said, Patreon powered. Yeah, so I'm going to say be on the lookout for new stuff from Speculate. If time permits for Rudy, who's our great audio editor, there may be a special excerpt in the Speculate feed this coming week where you'll get to listen to the first chunk of a special episode that Brandon, Greg, and I recorded last year with a bunch of fun stuff, where you'll basically get a little bit for free. So that's just for everybody. It's all good. And then for people who are excited to hear more, you can become a subscriber at the Speculate Patreon. So I know that I have a personal Patreon, and then there's the Speculate Patreon that I work on, and some people back one and are not in a position to be able to back both. That's totally fine. But for the people that like Speculate, keep your eyes peeled for that. There will be a fun thing. If you are already a patron at the $3 level or higher on Speculate, you already have access to this video or in the audio form. So I will say as a reminder to folks who are already patrons there, if you're a patron at that $3 level or higher, there is a bunch of exclusive stuff that you can go back and check out, and we would love to hear what you think about it, so we know what other kinds of like special episodes to record as a bonus for people who are patrons. So that is that. I will probably be back with another stream on Wednesday that will either be me finishing or trying to finish Cult of the Lamb or starting something else. I like the writing, like talking about writing and talking about like game design and doing TTRPG stuff. So I may shift some of the balance of what my streaming schedule looks like to closer to maybe like 60-40 video games, TTRPG stuff, or to like 50-50. But that may also still be subject to various whims and what other stuff in my life is looking like. So that's that. I've put up the various notices. I'm gonna check Twitch to see if there's other stuff. I think, yeah. So I think Greg is still doing a reading over on twitch.tv/ArvinElron. So let's go raid over there. I think some of you are probably also live over there as well, but let's send some love over there. Greg is one of my co-hosts for Speculate. His channel that we're going to is the channel that we do Speculate on, and right now there is a multi-author reading from Athos Arts, which is a cool independent publisher. So go over there. As a reminder, I'm just gonna I'm typing out the raid message. My hands are slightly off middle, and so that makes the typing harder. So yeah, let's go over and say hi, hang out there if you can. Otherwise, I will see you some other time. Thanks so much to The Kids Are Asleep, to Premisaurus, and to Caranthology for hanging out and chatting, and for everybody else who has been watching. And to you, the person and people who are watching on YouTube later on. Take care. See you next time.